A father who once had everything loses it all after an unexpected betrayal. Homeless and hopeless, he and his young daughter survive on the streets, relying only on each other. When a stranger offers them bread and hope, fate begins to change quietly. But no one could have imagined that this simple gesture would transform 3 lives forever. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. We continue. The sun was setting over the skyscraper horizon of London when Maurice Alden parked his BMW in the garage of the luxurious Kensington condominium. At 42, he was the picture of success, owner of Alden Developments, one of the most respected construction companies in the capital, with projects in several counties and a fortune estimated in millions. He picked up his Italian leather briefcase and adjusted his tie before entering the panoramic elevator. "Daddy." Sophia, his 6-year-old daughter, ran to him as soon as the apartment door opened. With curly hair and olive skin like her mother, who had passed away when Sophia was just 2, she was the reason Maurice woke up every morning. "My princess." He lifted her into his arms, spinning her around the spacious living room, decorated with contemporary art and designer furniture. "How was your day?" "Aunt Marlene taught me how to make origami. Look." She held out a small, colorful paper bird, proud. Marlene, the housekeeper, who had looked after the girl for 4 years, smiled from the hallway. "She has talent, Mr. Alden." Maurice nodded his thanks and carried his daughter to the balcony, from where the illuminated city could be seen. "Next week we're going to our beach house, just the 2 of us." "How about that?" Sophia applauded enthusiastically, unaware that this would be their last night in that apartment. The next morning, Maurice woke to the insistent ringing of his cell phone. It was Clarice, his secretary, her voice trembling. "Mr. Alden, you need to come to the office now. Smacy is here with warrants." His blood ran cold. In less than an hour, he was in the commercial building in Canary Wharf, watching in astonishment as police officers and auditors searched every drawer, every computer at Alden Developments. "What's going on?" he asked a senior officer supervising the operation. The man stared at him with professional coldness. "Investigation for tax evasion and money laundering. We have evidence of diversions of over £30 million over the last 5 years. This is absurd. My company is clean. We've always declared everything correctly." That's when Mark Burton, his chief accountant and college friend, entered, escorted by 2 police officers, head bowed, handcuffed. "Mark, what does this mean?" The accountant couldn't look at him. "I'm sorry, Maurice. I had no choice." The next few hours were a blur of statements, documents, lawyers, and of terrible truth emerging. Mark, the man who had managed the company's finances since its foundation, had falsified balance sheets, created shell companies, and diverted fortunes to overseas accounts in Marossa's name, without his knowledge. Marossa's forged signature was on hundreds of documents. "How could you?" Maurice asked when they were briefly alone in a meeting room. "We were friends since our Oxford days. You were my best man, you're Sophia's godfather." Mark wiped away a tear. It started small. Gambling debts, then it became an addiction. By the time I realized it was too late. Before nightfall, Marossa's empire crumbled like a house of cards. His accounts were blocked, his assets frozen. The next day's Guardian headline featured his face and the title, "Construction Tycoon Involved in £1 million Tax Fraud Scheme." At home, he had to face Sophia's confused gaze as he explained they would need to move house for a while. He didn't have the courage to say that the apartment was already being seized, as were the cars, the beach house, everything. "But what about my toys? And a school?" the girl asked, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. Take only the essentials, princess. The rest we'll buy later. It was a white lie. In his personal account, only £267 and 42 pence remained. The friends he thought he had disappeared at the first sign of scandal. Investors demanded explanations he didn't have. Journalists pursued him. Clients 3 weeks later, contracts. Maurice and Sophia reached their limit. Staying at a cheap guest house in the East End, with money running out. Maurice heard from the manager that they needed to leave the room. His credit card had been declined. Just one more night, please, he pleaded, looking at Sophia, who slept in the single bed. My daughter is tired. The manager, a middle-aged man with deep dark circles under his eyes, shook his head. I'm sorry, but I have orders. If you don't pay, you need to leave by 6. On that cold June night. Maurice Alden, who had once graced the covers of business magazines as one of the most promising entrepreneurs in the UK, slept on a park bench in Victoria Park, with Sophia huddled in his arms, covered only by his jacket. Daddy, I'm hungry, she murmured at dawn, her lips cracked and eyes sunken. He rummaged through his pockets, finding a few coins, enough for a bread roll from the corner bakery, which they shared in silence. The following days were a nightmare. The court case was proceeding, but his lawyer abandoned the case when he realized he wouldn't be paid. Maurice tried for jobs, but his name was tainted, his face known. We don't hire criminals, he heard in an interview. But I'm innocent, he protested, in vain. They slept in hostels when they could find vacancies, in parks when they couldn't. Sophia fell ill with a bad flu, but they had no money for medicine. Her thin, pale face was like a knife in Maurice's heart. On a particularly cold night, they sheltered under a shop awning on Oxford Street. Sophia cried from hunger, hugging her knees. People hurried past, averting their gaze, some tossing coins without stopping. Maurice no longer cared about pride. He accepted any help to feed his daughter. That's when a woman in a light blue uniform stopped before them. Dark hair tied in a simple bun, sun-kissed skin, calloused hands. She carried a shopping bag and had a badge hanging from her neck. Julia Parry, Nanny, Horizon College. She looked at Sophia, then at Maurice, without the disgust or pity he was accustomed to seeing. It was a different look, almost understanding. Your daughter needs something warm to eat, she said with a northern accent. There's a diner just around the corner. Come with me. Maurice hesitated. Pride still battled within him. We don't need charity. Julia didn't back down. It's not charity. It's humanity. Everyone deserves to eat. There was something in the firmness of that simple woman that allowed no refusal. Maurice stood up, helping Sophia do the same. The girl looked at the stranger with curiosity, a small glimmer of hope, and so, following a nanny they barely knew, father and daughter walked down the illuminated avenue, unaware that this woman would change their destiny forever. In the small diner on Oxford Street, Sophia devoured the hot sandwich and chocolate as if she had never eaten before. Julia watched the child with a gentle smile, while Maurice kept his eyes down, holding his coffee with trembling hands. Thank you, Auntie, Sophia exclaimed when she finished, her eyes shining for the first time in weeks. There was a little color in her cheeks now. Julia stroked the girl's disheveled hair. You're welcome, little one. What's your name? Sophia Alden. I'm 6 years old. She proudly showed 6 fingers. And you? Julia Parry. But you can call me Groob. Maurice finally found the courage to face the woman. Why are you doing this? Julia shrugged, a simple gesture, but laden with meaning. I've been on the other side of the coin. I know what it's like to be in need with a child. She hesitated, as if deciding how much to reveal. I came from Manchester to London 8 years ago, with a small child and many dreams. Life wasn't easy. And your son? Sophia asked innocently. A shadow crossed Julia's face. He lives with my sister in northern England. I send money every month. She quickly changed the subject. I work as a nanny for 3 different families. It's tiring, but it pays the bills. When they left the diner, the night had grown even colder. Julia looked at the cloudy sky, then at the father and daughter. Where will you sleep tonight? Maurice swallowed hard. We'll figure something out. Daddy, I'm cold, Sophia murmured, clinging to his legs. Julia bit her lip, fighting an internal battle visible in her eyes. Finally she sighed. Look, I live in a small room at the back of a townhouse in Stratford. It's small, but there's a sofa where you can sleep, she said, looking at Maurice. Sophia can stay with me in the bed, just for tonight, until you find a place. The offer was so unexpected that Maurice almost automatically refused. His pride screamed not to accept more charity, but Sophia's hopeful and exhausted gaze decided for him. Just for one night, he agreed reluctantly. Julia's small room was indeed tiny. A single room with a single bed, a worn sofa, a mini-fridge, and a two-burner stove. A minuscule bathroom completed the space. But it was clean and, more importantly, it was warm. It's not much, but it's better than the street, she said, making up the sofa. Tomorrow morning I have to work. But you can stay here until I get back at night. Sophia fell asleep quickly in the bed, while Maurice remained awake on the narrow sofa, staring at the ceiling. How had he gotten to this point? Depending on the charity of a stranger. I can't sleep. Julia's soft voice emerged from the gloom. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, watching him. Sorry if we're bothering you, he murmured. It's not that. She hesitated. Can I ask, what happened to you? You don't seem like someone who has always lived on the streets. There was something in the direct simplicity of that woman that broke Maurice's barriers. In a low voice, so as not to wake Sophia, he told her everything. The success, the betrayal, the fall, the closed doors. The worst part isn't losing everything, he confessed. His voice choked. It's knowing that I failed as a father. Sophia deserved more. Julia listened without interrupting, without judging. When he finished, she simply said, Tomorrow is a new day. Rest. One night turned into 3, then into a week. Julia left early for work and returned at night, always bringing something for Sophia. A used book, a hair ribbon, a drawing made by the children she cared for. The girl visibly blossomed, recovering the childish joy that had almost been suffocated on the streets. Maurice, for his part, spent his days looking for work, any work, but his name was still toxic in the market. In a particularly frustrating week, he only managed an odd job unloading trucks at New Covent Garden Market, which earned him little more than £100. It's a start, Julia said, encouragingly, when he put the money on the table, offering to help with expenses. She refused. Save it to start over. On a Saturday morning, while Julia was washing clothes in the back sink and Sophia was drawing sitting on the floor, a firm knock sounded at the door. A woman in a suit with a clipboard introduced herself. Deborah Martin, Social Services. We received a report about a child possibly in a vulnerable situation at this address. Maurice's heart froze. The upstairs neighbor, who always looked at them suspiciously when they entered or left, had probably made the report. Deborah entered, observing the cramped space with clinical eyes. She saw Sophia's drawings, the sleeping mat on the floor where Maurice now slept, the girl's toothbrush next to the sink. "Are you the father?" she asked, looking at Maurice. "Yes, and you?" She turned to Julia. "I'm a friend. They're staying with me temporarily." Deborah wrote something on her clipboard. "Is Sophia enrolled in any school?" Maurice felt his face burn. "Not at the moment. We are in a transitional situation." The social worker interviewed Sophia separately, then called the adults. "I'll be direct," she said, her voice firm but not unkindly. "The situation here is clearly inadequate for a child. 3 people in one room, no space, no privacy. The girl out of school. You, sir, without a stable job." She looked at her papers. "I understand you're going through difficulties, Mr. Alden, and that Miss Perry is helping, but my job is to ensure the child's well-being. Are you going to take my daughter?" Marossa's voice was just a horrified whisper. "Not immediately. I'm giving you 2 weeks to regularize the situation. This means finding adequate housing, enrolling Sophia in a school, and proving a minimum income to support her." She handed him a paper. "Otherwise, we will begin the process to place her in temporary shelter." When Deborah left, Maurice collapsed on the sofa, his face in his hands. "They're going to take Sophia from me." Julia sat beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "They won't. We'll find a way." "How?" he asked, desperate. "No one wants to give me a job. I don't have money to rent a place, even the cheapest." Sophia, sensing the tension, approached timidly. "Daddy, are we going to have to leave Auntie Rue's house?" The look that father and daughter exchanged broke Julia's heart. She took a deep breath and made a decision that would change the lives of the 3 forever. "I know the headmistress of the school where I work," she said, determined. "I'll talk to her tomorrow about a place for Sophia. As for housing, quotes, she hesitated. "We can say you're my family, cousins from the north who came to London." "No one needs to know the truth." "But that could hurt you," Maurice protested. "If they find out you lied, double, quotes." Julia shrugged. In that simple gesture he was beginning to admire. "Some rules are made to be broken when it comes to protecting those in need." That night, after Sophia fell asleep, Julia and Maurice talked late. She told him about her childhood in Manchester, her early pregnancy, coming to London in search of opportunity, the pain of leaving her son with her sister to be able to work. He spoke about his college days, the beginning of the company, the failed marriage to Sophia's mother, who abandoned them when the girl was just 2. Under the dim light of a cheap lamp, 2 completely different lives met, revealing more similarities than either of them could imagine. "Thank you," Maurice said, when the clock already marked almost 2 in the morning. "Not just for taking us in, but for believing in me." Julia smiled, and in that smile there was a silent promise that, somehow, everything would be okay. What neither of them knew was that, kilometers away, in a luxurious Mayfair penthouse, Vanessa Alden, Maurice's ex-wife and Sophia's biological mother, was watching a news report about the scandal involving Alden Developments. Her eyes gleamed with sudden interest as she picked up the phone. "Dr. Evans, it's Vanessa. I need you to investigate something for me. Urgent." The next 2 weeks brought an unexpected routine to Julia's small room. Sophia was enrolled at Horizon College, where the headmistress, Mrs. Eleanor, moved by the story told by the nanny, with some strategic adaptations, not only accepted the girl, but provided free uniform and school supplies through the school's assistance program. "I made a new friend today," Sophia announced in her first week, eyes shining as she showed a colorful drawing. "Her name is Bianca. She lent me her colored pencils." Maurice watched his daughter's transformation with a mixture of relief and gratitude. The smile that had almost faded on the streets was back, more radiant than ever. Every morning, Julia took Sophia to school along with the other children she cared for, and Maurice went out in search of work. After countless closed doors, he finally got a job as a kitchen assistant in a restaurant in Brixton. The salary was much lower than he had ever imagined earning, and the work was exhausting, cutting vegetables, washing pans, cleaning the floor late into the night. But for the first time in months, he tasted recovered dignity. In the small room, the forced cohabitation created situations both comical and tense. The tiny bathroom required a coordinated ballet of turns in the mornings. The limited space meant that every object needed its exact place, and the three very different personalities had to find ways to coexist in harmony. "You fold clothes in a strange way," Julia commented one Sunday afternoon, watching Maurice organize the small closet they now shared. "Strange how?" He raised an eyebrow. "Everything at right angles, as if you'd used a ruler." She took one of his shirts and folded it with fluid movements. "This way is faster and takes up less space." "And you put the salt on the wrong side of the stove," he retorted with a half smile. "And you leave the toothpaste uncapped." Sophia, who was playing on the floor with a doll borrowed from one of the children Julia cared for, looked at the two adults and laughed. "You two are like Leo and Lucy from my soap opera." "Who?" they asked in unison. "The characters who fight all the time because they like each other," the girl explained with the surprising wisdom of a 6-year-old. The innocent comment caused an awkward silence, with both quickly averting their gaze. On a rainy night, when Sophia was already sleeping soundly, Maurice found Julia in the small covered area at the back, watching the rain fall. He offered her a cup of tea, which she accepted with a smile. "Sophia is different," he commented, leaning against the doorframe, happier, more secure. "Thanks to you." Julia shook her head. "She's a special child, strong like her father." "Strong?" Maurice laughed without humor. "I fell apart, Rue. I lost everything. Losing things isn't the same as losing yourself." She looked at him with those deep eyes, which seemed to see beyond appearances. "Many men in your place would have abandoned their daughter, looked for an easy way out. You didn't. That's strength." That night they talked for hours, more openly than ever. Maurice told her about the court case that was still ongoing, the small hopes that were emerging. A former employee had contacted him, offering to testify that the signatures had indeed been forged. "Maybe I can clear my name eventually," he said. "But the company, the life we had, that's over. What if it was a chance to build something different, something more meaningful?" The idea hung between them like an unexplored possibility. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into almost 2 months of living together. A routine was established. Maurice worked from 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. at the restaurant. Julia cared for children during the day, and Sophia divided her time between school and the apartment. On Sundays, their only common day off, the three went to Regent's Park or the South Bank Centre, free places where Sophia could run and play. It was on one of these Sundays, while Sophia was feeding the ducks in the lake, that Maurice finally found the courage for something he had been putting off. "Drew," he began, nervous as a teenager, "I wanted to thank you for everything you've done for us. You've thanked me 1,000 times." She smiled. "No, I mean, really." He took a deep breath. "You changed our lives, not just by giving us a roof, but by showing me that starting over is possible, that losing everything doesn't mean losing dignity. Julia felt her face flush, averting her gaze to the lake. What I mean is ... Quotes. He hesitated, searching for the right words. I never imagined feeling this again, after everything that happened. But it happened. And it has nothing to do with gratitude or debt, or... it's something more. She finally looked at him, her eyes shining. Something more. He took her hand in his, calloused after months of hard work. I'm in love with you, Julia Pat. With your strength, your generosity, your joy, even in the face of difficulties. And I know I have nothing to offer now, that I am a man starting from scratch, with a tarnished name and an uncertain future. But I needed you to know. The silence that followed seemed to last an eternity, until Julia gently squeezed his hand. You think you have nothing to offer. She shook her head, smiling. Maurice, you gave me something I didn't even know I needed. A family. When their lips finally met, it was as if the world around them disappeared for an instant. There, on that simple park bench, under the distracted gaze of a girl feeding ducks, a silent promise of reconstruction was born. Back in the small apartment that night, Sophia noticed the change immediately, with the keen instinct of children. You two are different, she declared during their simple dinner. Auntie Rue is smiling more, and Daddy is too. Maurice and Julia exchanged knowing glances. Sophia, Maurice began carefully, what would you think if Rue was more than our friend? If she was, like part of our family? The girl frowned, processing the idea, then broke into a radiant smile. Are you going to be my mummy, Auntie Rue? The question, so direct and full of hope, caught Julia by surprise. Her eyes filled with tears. If you want me to. The answer came in the form of a tight hug, with Sophia practically jumping out of her chair to throw herself into Julia's arms. That night marked the beginning of a new configuration. With Maurice's salary at the restaurant and Julia's work as a nanny, they managed to save enough money to rent a small, but slightly larger, apartment in the same neighborhood. It had 2 tiny bedrooms, a small living room, a kitchen, and a bathroom. A palace compared to the tiny room where they had lived. The move happened on a sunny Saturday, with the help of Mrs. Eleanor and her husband, who lent them an old van. Their belongings fit into a few boxes, but the joy couldn't be measured. Our house, Sophia said, running through on that the first night in their new home, after Sophia fell asleep. Maurice and Julia sat on the floor of the empty living room, sharing cheap wine in plastic cups, celebrating every small victory. I never thought I'd be so happy to have an old fridge and a second-hand sofa, Maurice confessed, laughing. That's because now you know what really matters, Julia replied. He hugged snuggling up beside him, feeling a peace that seemed impossible months ago. You and Sophia. You are what matters. The kiss that followed sealed a promise of a shared future. Until Morosa's phone, a simple pay-as-you-go he had recently managed to buy, rang, breaking the moment. Hello, he answered, finding the call strange at that hour. The voice on the other end made him pale. Preston, your lawyer. It's sorry to call so late, but it's urgent. Vanessa is back. Vanessa, my ex-wife. Yes. She's filed for custody of Sophia. And she has a good lawyer. The phone almost slipped from his hand. Julia, realizing something was wrong, approached worriedly. Why? After 4 years without a word? Maurice questioned, his voice trembling. The lawyer mentioned something about an inheritance, Julia remembered. How much money would it be? Vanessa's mother was an heiress to a hotel chain. We're talking millions, perhaps tens of millions. Maurice ran his hands over his face, exhausted. How can I compete with that? I'm a failed former businessman, working as a kitchen assistant, living in a suburban apartment. Julia took his hands in hers. You are the father who stayed. The father who slept on the streets to keep his daughter safe. The father Sophia loves. When he hung up, he recounted the conversation to Julia, who hugged him in silence, both looking at the door of the room where Sophia slept, oblivious to the storm that was brewing. In the luxurious Mayfair apartment, Vanessa Alden hung up the phone with a calculated smile, while her lawyer organized documents on the marble coffee table. So, Dr. Evans, will we get custody? The man adjusted his expensive glasses. With your ex-husband's recent history. Unemployed, living on the streets, involved in financial scandals. It will be like taking candy from a baby. Vanessa smiled, pouring herself more champagne. Perfect. How long until I can access Mum's inheritance? As soon as we have definitive custody of the girl. Maybe 3-4 months with a good judge, and then I can send her to a boarding school or something. Dr. Evans hesitated for a second, but soon regained his professional composure. Technically, yes. You will have full legal authority over her. Vanessa watched the illuminated city from the panoramic window, mentally calculating how she would spend the millions of the inheritance. The daughter she had abandoned years earlier was now just a means to an end, a key to the fortune she always believed she deserved. What she didn't know was that, in the small, newly rented apartment, 2 people were already planning to fight with all their might for the genuine love they felt for Sophia. The court summons arrived on a sunny Tuesday. Maurice was at work when the bailiff knocked on the door of the small apartment, and Julia, who had taken the day off to organize their new home, received the envelope with trembling hands. Mr. Maurice Alden has 48 hours to present himself with the minor Sophia Alden to the Second Family Court for a preliminary hearing regarding the custody process initiated by Vanessa Tuxara Alden. The official words, cold and impersonal, sent a shiver down her spine. She sat on the worn sofa, rereading the document several times, as if she could change its content. When Maurice arrived from the restaurant, it was past midnight. He found Julia awake, her eyes red from crying silently. What happened? He asked, alarmed. She simply handed him the envelope. As he read, his face drained of color. They can't do this, he murmured, slumping beside her. Vanessa never wanted to be a mother. She abandoned Sophia, and she was too, to find herself in Europe. The lawyer mentioned something about an inheritance. Julia recalled. How much money would it be? Vanessa's mother was an heiress to a hotel chain. We're talking millions, perhaps tens of millions. Maurice ran his hands over his face, exhausted. How can I compete with that? I'm a bankrupt former businessman, working as a kitchen assistant, living in a suburban apartment. Julia took his hands in hers. You are the father who stayed, the father who slept on the streets to keep his daughter safe, the father Sophia loves. The next morning, Dr. Preston received the couple in his small office in Westminster. He was a middle-aged lawyer with deep, dark circles under his eyes and a briefcase full of accumulated cases, an overworked public defender, but with his ethics still intact. I'll be honest, he said, after analyzing the document. The situation is not good. You are at a financial disadvantage, which means less experienced lawyers, that is, me, against a renowned biological mother has a legal presumption in her favor, especially now that she shows interest in the child. But she abandoned Sophia. Maurice protested. Formally, you had a verbal agreement. No documents proving legal abandonment, Dr. Preston adjusted his worn glasses. And now she has her own home, financial stability, can offer material comfort. Things that unfortunately weigh in the system, and the fact that she only wants the girl because of the money, Julia questioned. Proving motivations is almost impossible. She will say she regretted it, that she matured, that she now has the conditions to be a mother. They left the office discouraged. On the way home, they passed a newsstand where a gossip magazine displayed Vanessa's photo at a gala party, with the headline, "Ex-model returns to the UK to reunite with daughter." The article spoke of a dedicated mother, separated from her husband by difficult circumstances, now determined to regain her daughter's love. "She's already manipulating public opinion." That afternoon,
Maurice murmured,
they had to
horrified.
explain the situation to Sophia. They sat with her in the small living room, choosing words carefully. "Sophia, remember we talked about your mother, that she was traveling?" Maurice began. The girl nodded, playing distractedly with her doll. "The mummy who left when I was a baby." "That's right. Well, she came back to the UK, and she wants to see you." Sophia frowned, confused. "Why? She didn't like me." The simplicity of the observation cut both their hearts. Julia held the girl's hand. "People change, Sophia. Maybe she'd realize she made a mistake. We'll have to go to court tomorrow," Maurice explained. "It's like school, but for adults to resolve complicated matters. Will I have to live with her?" The question came laden with fear. "We don't know yet," Maurice answered honestly. "But I want you to know one thing. No matter what happens, I will always love you and be around. Always." That night, Sophia had nightmares. She woke up screaming, dreaming she was being taken away by strangers. Julia comforted her, singing a northern lullaby, while Maurice watched from the doorway, helpless before his daughter's suffering. The central London courts building was imposing and intimidating. Maurice, Sophia, and Julia arrived early, all wearing their best clothes, which still seemed too simple for the formal environment. Dr. Preston met them at the entrance, carrying a battered briefcase. "Be respectful. Answer only what is asked, without exaggerated emotions," he instructed. As they waited in the hallway, a murmur announced Vanessa's arrival. She walked as if on a catwalk, her high heels echoing on the marble floor. She wore an impeccable white suit, discreet but visibly expensive jewelry, and was followed by two men in suits, her lawyer and an assistant. When she saw her daughter, her face lit up with a rehearsed smile. "Sophia, my princess." The girl cringed against her father, hiding her face. Vanessa seemed momentarily disconcerted, but soon regained her composure. "It's normal, she hasn't seen me in so long. We'll reconnect gradually." Her eyes then met Julia's, assessing her from head to toe. "And you must be the nanny, right?" "I'm Julia Parry," she replied with dignity, holding her gaze. "How kind of you to look after them during this difficult period," Vanessa commented condescendingly. Before Julia could respond, they were called into the courtroom. Judge Robert Vance was a middle-aged man with tired eyes who had seen too many family disputes. He observed both parties as the lawyers presented their opening arguments. Dr. Evans, representing Vanessa, spoke first. "Your Honor, we have here a mother who, due to life circumstances, had to temporarily distance herself. Today, emotionally mature and financially stable, she wishes to reconnect with her daughter, offering her the comfort and opportunity she deserves. On the other side, we have a bankrupt father involved in financial scandals, who even lived on the streets with the child, placing her in a situation of extreme risk." Maurice felt his blood boil. but remained silent as instructed. Dr. Preston then rose. "Your Honor, my client is a dedicated father who, despite recent difficulties, has always put his daughter's well-being first, while the mother was absent for 4 years, without any contact or child support. He was both mother and father, building a solid and loving relationship with Sophia." The judge listened carefully, then requested the reports from the social worker and psychologist who had interviewed Sophia. "I observe here," he said, flipping through the documents, "that the minor shows a strong bond with her father and significant attachment to Miss Julia Parry." He looked at Julia. "What is your exact relationship with the family?" Julia swallowed hard. "I am Morose's partner, Your Honor. Somir and he lived with me for a few months, and we recently rented an apartment together, a reconstructed family." Then the judge noted something. "And what is your occupation?" "I am a nanny in 3 different households." Vanessa leaned over to her lawyer, whispering something that made Dr. Evans smile disdainfully. "Your Honor," he intervened, "we need to consider what is best for the child. On one side, we have a mother capable of offering first-rate education, extracurricular activities, cultural trips. On the other, we have an unemployed father and his nanny girlfriend, barely able to pay rent." The comment caused murmurs in the room. Dr. Preston rose, indignant. "Your Honor, parental quality is not measured by bank balance." The judge banged his gavel, calling for order. Then he called Sophia for a private conversation in his chambers. The minutes that followed seemed like hours. Maurice and Julia exchanged apprehensive glances, while Vanessa casually checked her phone messages. When Sophia returned, her eyes were slightly red. She ran straight to her father and Julia, completely ignoring Vanessa, who couldn't hide her disappointment. Finally, the judge announced his preliminary decision. "Considering the complexity of the situation and the immediate well-being of the minor, I determine that Sophia shall remain under the temporary custody of the father, with supervised visits from the mother twice a week until the conclusion of the process." He looked directly at Vanessa. "Miss Alden, the reconnection with your daughter must be gradual, respecting the child's time and feelings." Vanessa couldn't hide her frustration, but nodded politely. "A social worker will make regular visits to both residences," the judge continued. "The final hearing is scheduled for 60 days from now, when I will make a definitive decision." As they left the courthouse, the momentary happiness of having kept Sophia was tempered by the anxiety of what was to come. Vanessa caught up with them in the hallway. "This isn't over, Maurice," she said in a low voice, so Sophia wouldn't hear. "My lawyers will investigate every detail of your current life. If they find anything, any slip-up, custody will be mine." Without waiting for a response, she turned and left, leaving in the air her expensive perfume and a veiled threat. The following weeks were tense. Vanessa complied with the supervised visits, always bringing extravagant gifts. The girl returned from these visits, quiet, withdrawn. "She asks if I want to live in a big house, with a pool and a room just for toys," Sophia recounted one night. "She said there I could have a real pony." Maurice tried to explain, without demonizing Vanessa, that love cannot be bought with gifts. Meanwhile, Julia sought ways to make their small home even more welcoming, with little touches that cost nothing: flowers picked on the way to work, homemade games, stories before bed. One Sunday morning, as they prepared a simple cake to celebrate Sophia's birthday, the doorbell rang. It was the social worker, making a surprise visit. "We came to check the living conditions," she explained, accompanied by an intern who noted everything down. They inspected every corner of the apartment, asking questions about routine, diet, schoolwork. Sophia proudly showed her small room, decorated with drawings she had made herself. Miss Alden mentioned that the child shares a room with the father's partner. The social worker commented. "No, I have my own room," Sophia protested. "Daddy and Auntie Rue sleep in the other room." The intern exchanged glances with the social worker, writing something down. "And who picks you up from school?" "Auntie Rue, when she's not working. Or Mrs. Eleanor, my head mistress, who's our friend." More notes, more glances. When they left, Maurice couldn't hide his concern. "They were looking for trouble. They found a family," Julia replied, determined. "Perhaps not the richest or the most conventional, but a real family." What they didn't know was that same night, Vanessa was receiving preliminary information in her luxurious penthouse. Small but clean apartment, child well cared for. Strong bond with the father and his partner, reported the private investigator she had hired. "The school speaks highly of the girl, and the neighbors too. It's not enough," Vanessa fumed. "I need something concrete against them." "Well, there is something, ... The man hesitated. "Their relationship. It's not formalized. Technically, they are living in cohabitation, with a minor present." Vanessa's eyes gleamed. "That's perfect. A traditional judge will consider that inappropriate." "There's more. The nanny, Julia Perry. I found something interesting in her past." He handed over a folder of documents. Vanessa smiled as she read, a smile that was anything but maternal. "Call Dr. Evans. I just found our secret weapon in the small living room of the North London apartment." Maurice, Julia, and Sophia blew out the birthday cake candles together, unaware of the storm brewing on the horizon. The supervised visits with Vanessa became increasingly elaborate. In one of them, she took Sophia to a luxury shopping center in South London, buying an absurd amount of clothes and toys. In another, she hired a professional photographer to record the maternal reunion, images that soon appeared on her social media, with hashtags like #MothersLove and #FamilyFirst. "She doesn't even ask about school," Sophia commented, as Julia brushed her hair for another meeting. "She just keeps talking about the new room she's preparing for me and showing pictures to her friends." Julia and Maurice exchanged worried glances, but maintained a neutral tone. Dr. Preston had warned them about the importance of never speaking ill of Vanessa in front of the girl. "Maybe she's just anxious to get to know you better," Julia suggested gently. Sophia shook her head, with a wisdom beyond her years. "She doesn't really look at me. Not like you and Daddy." The simple observation made Julia's eyes fill with tears. She hugged the girl tightly, feeling a deep love she never imagined possible for a child who wasn't biologically hers. Meanwhile, Maurice faced his own challenges. The restaurant where he worked closed abruptly, leaving him unemployed again. For weeks, he searched for another job, sending resumes to any available position. The answers were always the same: overqualified or simply silence. "I don't understand," he confided one night after Sophia fell asleep. "It's as if all doors are closed on purpose." Julia bit her lip, thoughtful. "Do you think Vanessa could ... use contacts to sabotage me?" "Absolutely." The suspicion was confirmed days later when an old college friend called. "Morris, mate, I needed to warn you. There's a woman calling several companies saying you're involved in fraud. She introduces herself as an HR consultant, but a friend of mine recognized the name. It's your ex, with the final judgment approaching. The news was devastating. The financial situation worsened. Julia now worked overtime, taking any additional work that came up. Maurice finally got a job as a rideshare driver, using a car borrowed from Mrs. Eleanor, the headmistress, who had become a friend and ally. On a grey Thursday, just 2 weeks before the final hearing, the bomb dropped. Preston appeared at the apartment without warning, his face tense. Vanessa has filed for an interim order to obtain immediate provisional custody, he announced as he entered. And she has new evidence against you. Maurice paled. What kind of evidence? The lawyer held out the documents. First, allegations of financial and housing instability. Second, questionable moral environment due to your informal relationship. And third, ... He hesitated, looking at Julia with embarrassment. Third, she insisted, your criminal record, Julia. The room fell silent. Maurice turned to her, confused. Record? What record? Julia sat down slowly, her face pale. I was 19. Needed medicine my son couldn't afford, with a high fever. I took medicine from a pharmacy. I was caught. You were arrested. Maurice asked gently, without judgment. I did community service, for being a first-time offender, and due to mitigating circumstances. The case was closed years ago. She looked at the lawyer. How did she find out? Private investigator, probably. And technically, this shouldn't be used against you, since the case is closed. Dr. Preston sighed. But the judge assigned to the interim order is known for being extremely conservative. Judge Helen Matthews. The name sent a chill down Maurice's spine. The same one who denied shared custody to that single father last year. Exactly. And the worst part, the interim hearing is tomorrow at 10 a.m. That night, after Dr. Preston left, Maurice and Julia had a long conversation. She told him everything about her past, getting pregnant at 17, the child's father who disappeared, the struggle to survive alone, the despair that led her to that single mistake. My son had pneumonia. The health center didn't have the antibiotics he needed. I begged at the pharmacy, offered to work to pay, but double quotes. She wiped away tears. I'm not proud of what I did, but I would do anything for him. Maurice held her hands. I understand. Any real father or mother would understand. What if the judge doesn't understand? What if this costs Sophia's custody? He had no answer. He just hugged her, as the fear of what was to come hung over them. The next morning dawned rainy and cold. They left Sophia at school, without mentioning the hearing so as not to worry her. At the courthouse, they found Vanessa and her lawyer already waiting, both confident. Judge Helen Matthews, an austere lady with impeccably styled grey hair, entered the room with firm steps. Her severe expression gave no clues about her inclinations. For almost 2 hours, the lawyers presented arguments. Dr. Evans painted a dramatic picture of a child living in instability, surrounded by figures of questionable morals. Dr. Preston desperately tried to contextualize the situation, explaining Maurice's recovery process and Julia's fundamental role. The judge asked Julia a single direct question. Miss Perry, do you consider yourself an adequate moral example for a developing child, given your history? Julia swallowed hard, but kept her gaze steady. Your Honor, I made a desperate mistake as a mother at 19. I spent the following years working honestly, caring for children with all love and respect. If that makes me morally inadequate, then anyone who has ever made a mistake to protect a child would also be. A heavy silence fell over the room. The judge observed her for long seconds before pronouncing, "Considering the evidence presented and the principle of the child's best interest, I grant the interim order requested. The minor Sophia Alden will pass into the provisional custody of the biological mother until the final hearing, when definitive custody will be decided." The world seemed to collapse. Maurice clutched the edge of the table to stay standing, while Julia stifled a sob. "The transfer will take place today," the judge continued, merciless. "Bailiffs will accompany the minor from school to the maternal residence. Can't we even say goodbye?" Maurice asked, his voice choked. "That would only make the transition more traumatic," the judge replied, though her eyes showed a brief flicker of compassion. "You'll have the right to supervised visits, to be scheduled." Vanessa couldn't hide her victorious smile as she left the room. Maurice and Julia remained seated, stunned, while Dr. Preston tried to comfort them. "We still have the final hearing. This isn't over." But at that moment, it seemed to be over. The idea of Sophia being taken without being able to say goodbye, without understanding what was happening, was unbearable. A few hours later, back in the small apartment, the phone rang. It was Mrs. Eleanor, the headmistress. "Maurice, they just took Sophia. I tried I tried to explain, but she was so scared. She cried for you and Julia." Marota's legs gave way, and he fell onto the sofa, the phone slipping from his hands. Julia picked it up, listening to the details through tears. "How was she?" "Crying a lot. Her mother tried to calm her with promises of gifts, but Sophia only wanted you." In the days that followed, they lived a nightmare. Vanessa cancelled the first scheduled visits, claiming Sophia was in the process of adaptation and very sensitive. When she finally allowed a visit, a week later, it was in her luxurious penthouse, under the supervision of a social worker she had chosen. The reunion was heartbreaking. Sophia ran into her father's and Julia's arms, clinging to them as if her life depended on it. "I want to go home," she begged between sobs. "Please, take me home." "Soon, my love," Maurice promised, although he didn't know if he could deliver. "We're fighting for you." In the allowed 45 minutes, Sophia told them about her new life, the huge room full of toys that didn't interest her, the different nannies who appeared each day, the adult parties Vanessa threw late into the night. "She only takes pictures with me when she has visitors," the girl confided. "Then she tells me to stay in my room with the maid." "Which maid?" Julia asked. "Mrs. Regina. She's nice to me. She gives me food when Mummy forgets." The information registered in their minds. When time ran out and Sophia was taken away again, crying and struggling, something broke inside them. In the taxi back to the apartment, Maurice made a decision. "We will fight with all our might. If Vanessa plays dirty, we need to find our own weapons." The final hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later, Dr. Preston, despite being disheartened by the interim order, promised to do his best. But Maurice and Julia knew they needed more. "Regina," Julia said suddenly. "The maid. She sees everything that happens in that house." "Yes, but why would she help us?" "We won't know until we try." Finding Regina's surname and contact wasn't easy. Finally, through a supermarket delivery driver who made regular deliveries to Vanessa's penthouse, they got a number. Julia made the call, identifying herself and explaining the situation. On the other end, there was a long silence. "I know who you are," Regina's tired voice finally said. "The girl won't stop talking about you and her father. Cries every night." "Please," Julia pleaded, "we need your help. Sophia is suffering." Another silence, longer this time. "Meet me tomorrow at Borough Market, at 3. Come alone. Regina was a robust woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and a worried expression. They sat at a discreet table in a diner. I shouldn't be doing this, she began, nervous. I could lose my job, and I need it. I understand, Julia replied. But if there's anything that can help, Sophia, Regina looked around, making sure no one was watching, then slid a small USB drive across the table. The madam is doing everything for money. I heard her talking to her lawyer that as soon as she gets definitive custody and accesses the inheritance, she's sending the girl to a boarding school in Switzerland. Regina lowered her voice. She mistreats the girl when there are no visitors. She screams, leaves her without food as punishment, locks her in her room. My God, Julia felt her stomach churn. I started recording. Hidden. Regina pointed to the USB drive. There are videos, audios. There's a conversation she had with a friend, saying the girl is just a ticket to fortune. Julia picked up the USB drive with trembling hands. Why are you helping us? Regina's eyes filled with tears. I have grandchildren. And that child, she doesn't deserve what she's going through. With the USB drive secure, Julia and Maurice rushed to Dr. Preston's office, who watched the recordings open-mouthed. This is pure dynamite, he declared. But we need to be careful. If they were obtained without consent, they could be considered illegal as evidence. And we let Sophia suffer for 3 more weeks until the hearing, Maurice protested. The lawyer reflected. There's one person who might be able to help us. A former colleague who is now a prosecutor for child protection. Prosecutor Paula Mendoza. She is known for putting the welfare of children above legal technicalities. That night, as the rain lashed London, 3 people gathered in a small cafe in the city centre. Maurice, Julia, and prosecutor Paula Mendoza, a determined woman in her 40s who watched the recordings with a grave expression. This is clear psychological abuse, she finally declared. As a prosecutor, I can request an immediate investigation and a re-evaluation of the interim order based on new evidence of risk to the minor. For the first time in weeks, a light of hope appeared. However, as the old saying goes, the night is always darkest before the dawn. And in the luxurious Mayfair penthouse, Vanessa received a call that made her pale. Her gaze fell on Sophia, who was drawing silently in the corner of the living room. That meddling maid. Regina, get in here now. The central London courts never seemed as imposing as on that morning of the decisive hearing. The London sky, usually polluted, had dawned surprisingly blue after days of rain, as if nature offered a premonition of hope. Maurice adjusted his borrowed tie, the same one he had worn at the previous hearing. Beside him, Julia nervously smoothed the simple dress she had bought, specially for the occasion. Dr. Preston reviewed his notes as they waited in the hallway. I'm scared, Julia confessed, her voice almost a whisper. Maurice squeezed her hand. Me too. But we have the truth on our side. Sometimes the truth isn't enough, she replied, the concern evident in her dark eyes. Prosecutor Paula Mendoza approached, emanating a confidence they desperately tried to feel. Judge Anthony Graham has a reputation for being fair and extremely focused on the well-being of children, she informed. The evidence is strong, but we need to be prepared for any scenario. The murmur in the hallway increased when Vanessa arrived, accompanied not only by Dr. Evans, but by 2 more lawyers. She wore a discreet and elegant outfit, her hair styled in a low bun, the perfect image of the responsible mother. She deliberately ignored Maurice and Julia, conversing in a low voice with her legal team. Sophia's absence was a weight in everyone's chest. The girl waited in a special room with a judicial psychologist, protected from the stress of the hearing until she was called. All rise for the entrance of His Honor, Judge Anthony Graham, announced the bailiff. The judge was a man in his 60s, with grey hair and thin-framed glasses. His face revealed no emotions as he took his seat and organized the documents. "We are here to decide the definitive custody of the minor Sophia Aldin. Currently 6 years old," he began, his grave voice filling the room. "Before hearing the lawyers, I would like to inform you that I have become aware of the new evidence presented by the prosecution and have determined that it be included in the process." Despite the defense's protests, Vanessa exchanged worried glances with Dr. Evans, who immediately stood up. "Your Honor, I reiterate that the recordings were obtained illegally, without consent, by an employee in clear violation of privacy. They cannot be considered valid evidence, Doctor," the judge replied firmly, "when it comes to the well-being of a child. The principle of the child's best interest overrides procedural technicalities. The jurisprudence is clear in this regard." It was a first positive sign. Julia squeezed Moroza's hand under the table. The arguments continued for more than 2 hours. Dr. Evans presented expert reports hired by Vanessa, attesting to the quality of the physical environment offered, the educational and social opportunities available to Sophia, and the mother's renewed emotional stability. Preston, in turn, built an emotional and factual case about the true nature of parental love. He presented testimonies from the headmistress, the neighbors, the social worker who had accompanied Maurice on the streets and later in the small apartment. "Your Honor," he concluded, "family is not defined by square footage or bank balances. It is defined by presence, by sacrifice, by prioritizing the other above oneself. My client slept on pavements to protect his daughter when he lost everything. Miss Parry opened her home and her heart to 2 strangers, becoming a maternal figure by choice, not by obligation." Prosecutor Paula Mendoza presented the videos and audios obtained by Regina. The courtroom fell silent as they heard Vanessa coldly stating that the girl is just a means to access the inheritance, and that as soon as the money is released, I'll send her to a boarding school and get on with my life. Even more shocking were the recordings of Sophia crying, locked in her room, begging to go home, while Vanessa's voice ordered her to stop the drama as she was ruining her party. When the recordings ended, even Vanessa's lawyers looked uncomfortable. She kept her face impassive, but her fingers drummed nervously on the table. "I would now like to hear the minor," the judge declared. "Without the presence of the parents or guardians, just the judicial psychologist and myself." The minutes that followed were the longest of Moros's and Julia's lives. Sitting in the hallway, they could barely breathe. What if she's afraid to tell the truth? What if Vanessa has threatened her? Julia worried. "Sophia is strong," Maurice replied, more to himself than to her. "Stronger than we think." Inside the room, Judge Anthony sat on the floor at Sophia's level, abandoning his formal posture to make her more comfortable. "Sophia, I know it's difficult to be here, but I need to understand how you feel," he explained gently. "There are no right or wrong answers, okay? I just want to know the truth." The girl, with big, serious eyes, nodded. "Tell me about your mother, Vanessa." Sophia looked at her own hands. "She buys lots of toys, and she has a big house. And how do you feel when you're with her?" The hesitation was brief, but revealing. Scared, She shouts a lot when there are no visitors, and she leaves me alone. And your father, what's it like when you're with him? The girl's face lit up immediately. Daddy always hugs me, even when he's tired from work. He reads me stories and tells me he loves me every day. And Julia? How does she treat you? Auntie ... double quotes. Sophia smiled, revealing the gap from a missing baby tooth. She braids my hair and teaches me songs. When I have nightmares, she sings until I fall asleep again. And she makes carrot cake for my birthday. The girl paused as if reflecting. She really loves me. It's not just pretend for the pictures. The judge exchanged a meaningful look with a psychologist. Sophia, if you could choose where to live, where would it be? Without hesitation, with my daddy and Auntie Rue, in our small house. Even knowing that in your mother's house, you would have more toys, a pool, maybe even a pony. Sophia looked directly into the judge's eyes, with a sincerity that only children possess. Toys don't hug you back. Back in the courtroom, everyone stood when the judge returned. Sophia was escorted to another room, where she would await the final decision. Having analyzed all the evidence, testimonies, and the opinion of the minor herself, the judge began. This court is ready to deliver its decision. The silence was so dense it could be cut with a knife. Maurice felt his heart beating so hard he feared everyone could hear it. The definitive custody of the minor Sophia Eldon is granted to her father, Maurice Eldon. The judge paused, allowing the meaning of the words to sink in. Furthermore, I officially recognize Julia Parry's fundamental role in the child's life, granting her legal status as a parental figure, with all inherent rights and responsibilities. Julia stifled a sob, tears streaming freely down her face. Maurice hugged her, equally emotional. As for Miss Vanessa Alden, the judge continued, his voice taking on a sterner tone, this court revokes all her visitation rights, in view of the clear evidence of psychological abuse and neglect. I further recommend that the public prosecutor's office investigate the possible practice of parental alienation and exploitation of the minor for financial gain. Vanessa stood up abruptly, her face contorted with rage. This is absurd. I'll appeal. Miss Alden, control yourself, or I will be forced to remove you from the room, the judge warned. And as for the inheritance that interested you so much, I am issuing an order for it to be placed in a trust fund, accessible only to Sophia when she reaches adulthood. Neither you nor the father will have access to these funds. That was the last straw. Vanessa exploded in a fit of rage, shouting insults until she was escorted out by 2 bailiffs. One last thing, the judge said, before adjourning the session. I would like to quote the words of Sophia herself, which perfectly summarize what we try to protect here today. Toys don't hug you back. This court is proud to prioritize genuine love above any material advantage. Hearing adjourned. When the side door opened and Sophia ran into the room, time seemed to freeze. She looked around, hesitant for a second, before spotting Maurice and Julia. Her face lit up with the purest relief and joy. Daddy, Auntie Rue. She ran like never before, throwing herself into their arms with such force she almost knocked them over. The 3 hugged, forming a perfect circle of love and belonging, as tears of joy streamed down their faces. Are we going home? Sophia asked, her eyes shining with hope. Yes, my love, Julia replied, kissing her forehead. We're going home. 6 months later. In a small ceremony in Regent's Park, the same place where Maurice had confessed his feelings to Julia, a new chapter began. Under a pergola decorated with simple wildflowers, Maurice waited nervously, adjusting the tie of his rented navy blue suit. Mrs. Eleanor, Regina, who had found a new job after being fired by Vanessa. Dr. Preston and Prosecutor Paula formed the small audience of guests. When the music began, played by a violinist friend of a colleague from the restaurant where Maurice now worked as a sous chef, everyone turned. Sophia appeared first, scattering flower petals along the path, wearing a simple white dress with a blue sash. Behind her, Julia walked radiant in a light blue dress, carrying a small bouquet of daisies, the same flowers Sophia used to pick for her on the way to school. The justice of the peace, a smiling gentleman, conducted the ceremony with words about second chances and families formed not by blood, but by love. Do you accept this man who has known the top of the world and the bottom of the pit, who has learned the true value of things, to love and respect for all the days of your life? He asked Julia. I do, she replied, her voice choked with emotion. And do you accept this woman who opened her heart and home when you had nothing to offer in return, to love and respect for all the days of your life? I do, Maurice replied, holding Julia's hands as if they were the most precious possession in the world. When the rings were exchanged, simple silver bands that had cost months of savings, Sophia asked to speak. Can I say something? She asked, pulling on Julia's dress hem. The justice of the peace smiled. Of course, little one. Sophia took a deep breath, as she had rehearsed. Auntie Roo, can I call you Mummy now? For real? There wasn't a dry eye at the ceremony. Julia knelt, getting to Sophia's level. I would be the happiest person in the world if you called me Mummy, she replied, her voice trembling. Sophia smiled, now revealing 2 missing baby teeth, and held out her small hand. In her palm rested a small bracelet of colorful beads made by herself at school. I made this for you to be my official mummy. Julia extended her wrist, allowing the girl to put on the bracelet. It's the most beautiful gift I've ever received. The party that followed was simple, but full of joy. In the small apartment decorated with balloons and out-of-season Christmas lights, friends and neighbors gathered to celebrate not just a wedding, but the triumph of a family that had overcome the greatest challenges. In a corner, Dr. Preston talked with Prosecutor Paula about the foundation they were creating to help vulnerable parents. Regina proudly showed photos of her grandchildren to Mrs. Eleanor, and in the center of the room, Maurice, Julia, and Sophia danced together, laughing, forming a circle that no one else would ever be able to break. Later, when most of the guests had left, Sophia fell asleep on the sofa, exhausted from the day's emotion. Maurice and Julia sat on the small balcony, watching the city lights. You know, at the most difficult time, when we were on the streets, I promised Sophia that one day we would have a real home again, Maurice confessed. At the time, it seemed like a white lie. Julia rested her head on his shoulder. And now, I understand that a home isn't a place. It's what we built together. They looked at the sky, where a particularly bright star stood out against London's pollution. I think we should adopt a child, Julia said suddenly, when we're a little more settled. Maurice looked at her, surprised. Are you sure? Sophia deserves a little brother or sister, and there are as many children needing a family as we needed a home. He smiled, thinking about how life comes full circle. From the pinnacle of success to rock bottom, and now to a happiness that no fortune could buy. I think you're right, Mrs. Alden, he replied, savoring her new surname. After all, family isn't who you're born with, it's who chooses to stay. At that moment, as if sensing they were talking about her, Sophia appeared at the balcony door, rubbing her sleepy eyes. Can I stay with you? She asked. They made room between them, and the girl snuggled there, exactly where she belonged, in the heart of that family that destiny had united in the most improbable circumstances, proving that sometimes you have to lose everything to gain what truly matters. End of story, dear listeners. We hope Maurice, Julia, and Sophia's story has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories about new beginnings, love, and overcoming adversity. Find it by clicking the link on the left. If you were moved by this family that formed in the most difficult moments, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Every day, we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life and the bonds we form along the way. Share in the comments if you have witnessed or lived stories of new beginnings like this one. After all, as we learned from Maurice, Julia, and Sophia, family isn't who you're born with, it's who chooses to stay. We look forward to seeing you in our next story.